Today we're going to talk about two of the most powerful skills you can have as a leader: speaking and listening.
So I'll have to backtrack one step here by revealing a really important truth about listening that most people don't understand and don't know.
Julian Treasure, he's a world-class speaker, best-selling author, and his TED Talks have been viewed by over 150 million people.
Great leaders do ask and do listen, and they gain enormously by doing that.
Get ready for a masterclass in the fine art of communication. I can't think of a better topic for leaders and a better skills for leaders to learn about and develop than the skills of listening and communicating. Your talk, the talk you did on how to speak so that people want to listen on TED, it's been viewed by gazillions of people. Why is it you think that your content has had such an impact on people?
A very interesting question. That talk has been seen by 5 times as many people as my TED Talk on listening, which is quite interesting. So I think people are generally quite keen to be heard, rather more keen to be heard than they are to listen to others. And there's a mismatch there, isn't there? Yeah, I guess that was the 5th TED Talk that I'd given in 5 years. That's a fairly unusual thing to happen, but that's what happened with me. So by the time it got to the 5th one, hopefully I knew how to do it quite well. So it was a combination of delivering it well, which is, it's not an accident. I've done a lot of training around that. And, perhaps we can talk about some of the tips from me to anybody who speaks in public. But so I kind of felt very happy that I'd given a good account of myself when I walked off that stage. And the content clearly is something which resonates with, millions of people, clearly. I've had a lot of people in workshops I've done around the world over the years saying, I don't feel people listen to me. I can't get my point across. I can't make the impact. And we all want to make a difference in the world, don't we? We've got things we want to achieve, and there's not much we can achieve on our own. Mostly it's going to require assembling a team of people in some way, shape or form, getting support, enrolling people in a vision, whatever it might be. And the voice is the way to do that. You're not really going to do that by sending emails to people. So I think a lot of people are conscious that this is really important. And the big thing, to me, the absolutely crazy thing is when we school our children, we teach them how to read and write. We do not teach them how to speak or listen. And that's mad. That's completely wrong.
Yeah, totally. Makes sense. It seems like it's absolutely such a skill. I think the title is just what grabs you. I mean, first of all, anytime somebody teaches how to do something, and I think also to speak so that people want to listen. Like as you said, I think we all have something to share. You can't imagine a lot of people are frustrated, and it's a very frustrating thing to not to be able to express yourself, or the worst thing in the world, just not to be heard.
Definitely. I mean, it's, we all have an ego as well, don't we? I mean, and that's something to guard against. I mean, I do a lot of work on that in communication because there are a lot of ego-based aspects of communication which are very destructive. Nevertheless, it does hurt to be ignored, to be demeaned, to be marginalized, to be left out. I mean, all those things are painful for human beings. And certainly when you feel that you've been able to hold an audience, whether it's one person or 1,000, and get your message across and, move somebody, take them from where they were to where they are now in a good way, well, that's a wonderful feeling. So it is a really, really important skill. When I give my talks, I talk about just 3 things which are affected by your ability to speak and listen. Those 3 things are your happiness, your effectiveness, and your well-being. Only 3, but they are 3 quite important.
Happiness, things. Effectiveness,
and well-being.
And well-being. All right.
And they're all profoundly affected by how well we speak, and how well we listen.
Mm.
And that all happens inside of a context as well, of course, which is the sound around us. And I've had years working with sound, and that has profound effects on us as well. So
Yeah.
listening, it's not just listening to other people; it's also listening to the environment and saying, "Is this productive, healthy
Mm.
sound I'm surrounding myself with here?"
Yeah. Well, when you say sound, you hear people, they either tune in or they tune out. So why do people tune out from people who are what mistakes do people make in communication that tend to get people to tune out of what they're saying?
There are two aspects of speaking which we need to pay attention to. They're equally important, I think. There's what you say, and there's how you say it. So
Mm.
content and delivery.
Mm.
And actually, I asked Chris Anderson, the head of TED, which one of those he thought was more important,
Mm.
because he's seen more talks than pretty much anybody on this planet, I think. And he said, well, they're both really important, but if I had to choose, it would be content. Because if somebody is delivering earth shattering content in a boring way, I'll really work hard to stay with them. Whereas if somebody is delivering vapid nonsense brilliantly, it's just annoying. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
both very important, and it's a shame if if you've got amazing content and you don't do it justice by delivering it well.
Mm.
But they're both vital, and so let's talk about content for a moment, because an awful lot of people don't think very carefully about
Mm.
what it is they're going to say. If you
Mm.
have a team meeting, maybe, or a sales presentation, there is a critical question which really comes out of my work with the interrelationship between speaking and listening. So I'll have to backtrack one step here by revealing a really important truth about listening that most people don't understand and don't know. Your listening is unique.
Mm.
Every human being's listening is unique. And it is a huge error that's made by most people in the world. The innate assumption everybody listens like I do. They don't.
Mhm.
Because we listen through a set of filters, which are things like the culture we're born into, the language we learn to speak, the values, attitudes, and beliefs that we gather along the way. And then in any given situation, our intentions, expectations, emotions, assumptions, all these things mean that our listening is unique to us and it changes over time as well. So whether you're talking to one person or a group of people, you have a unique listening that you're speaking into.
Mhm.
And
Makes
therefore,
sense.
the really important question to ask yourself before the event and during the event as well is, what's the listening I'm speaking into?
Mm.
Now, that's how you hit the bullseye instead of missing the target altogether. So delivering the same thing in the same way to different people, that is very far from optimal.
So let me ask you, because I'm going to probably butcher this, okay? But I think there's a quote from Abraham Lincoln that's like something like, if I have to give an hour talk, give me a week. If I have to give a half an hour speech, give me a month. But if I've got to give a 15-minute speech, I need a lot of time. I'm sure that's not what he said, but it's kind of the Irish version of it. But, to do a TED talk is probably the most difficult thing there is. You have 15 minutes. I you have everybody in that audience who has a different listening style. How do you tap into their listening style? And as you said, you don't show up and you're not just riffing it. Like, what is your preparation, and how do you go about to communicate in that short a period of time when everybody has a listening style? Because as you said, there's people on this webinar today and this podcast that they don't have time. They're not taking the time. So what is your process? How do you go through that?
Well, when I train people now on public speaking, I break it down into 3 stages. And I think all 3 stages are very important. And the initials are PPD. It's a pretty similar process to that an Olympic athlete would use. The first P is practice.
Mm.
That is to say, practice the skill of speaking. Now, most people don't do that. I've given talks to audience of, you get 1,000 senior managers and CEOs, and I say, how many of you use your voice in business? Everybody puts their hand up. How many of you have had formal vocal training? About 3 people.
Mm.
What? If your voice is really important to you in business, then you need to, at the very least, practice the skill of public speaking. The reason most people are frightened of public speaking, or many people are, is that they don't do it very often.
Mm.
So it's like anything. It's like riding a bike, driving a car. I mean, when you remember the first time you ever drove a car, your hands, you had to have them unhooked from the steering wheel afterwards. You were sweating, you were terrified.
Yeah.
It was anything but easy. Now you drive from A to B and you don't even remember doing it because you were thinking about what you're going to have for lunch, or,
Yeah.
the meeting you just had or something. So, practice creates that unconscious competence, that level
Mm.
of ability. And so practicing speaking, you can do that by joining Toastmasters. You can do it by creating a buddy group with some friends and come around, around everybody's house on a Wednesday night, and each give a 5-minute talk and then critique it, that kind of thing. Simply practicing doing the thing is very important. If you can't do those things, you can record yourself, set your phone up on a tripod, film yourself doing it. And I promise pretty quickly you'll be going, oh my goodness, I didn't know I did that. So
It-
that's
yeah.
practicing skill of speaking.
Mm.
Doesn't matter what you're saying, just make it up, create talks on anything. Then the second P is prepare. So you've got a specific talk to give. Let's say it's a TED talk, if you're lucky enough. And, anybody can apply to do a TED talk. You just need to have an idea that's worth spreading and some evidence that you're able to talk, without falling over or making a mess of it. And so let's say it is a TED talk. You know how long you've got. You know your topic. Well, you plan your content out, and there are lots more subtle ways to do it than, just asking the question, what's the listening? So what's the journey you're going to take people on? What are your main points? What's your intention? All that kind of thing. So you create your content and then rehearse. So this is the prepare part. It's different from practicing the skill in general. We're now rehearsing a specific talk. And I can tell you my first ever TED talk, which was about the 4 effects of sound. They'd never had anybody use sound in a TED talk before, so they were quite excited about it. And I think I performed that about 30 times to my daughter Alice, who was at the time probably about 10, I think. So she knew it extremely well. So I had a TV screen behind me. She was on the sofa. She was my audience, and I performed it as if for real over and over again until I really, really knew it. Now, I'm not suggesting learn every moment and every nuance of the thing, but I knew it well enough to jazz. And that to me is when you're in a great state with a talk, where you're not frightened of forgetting things, but you can go on stage and just like a jazz musician, you know the chord changes, but you can riff, you can have fun, you can
Mhm.
engage with the audience, you can have a relationship there. That's the really golden area of giving a great talk. So practicing like that is, or preparing like that, and obviously you then want to make sure you check that the facilities are going to be what you need. What do you mean you haven't got a projector? I use slides, that kind of thing.
No
Don't do that.
surprises. Yeah.
Yeah, really. So check everything's there, check all that stuff. I make a point when I go into a big hall these days. First people I go and talk to is the AV crew, introduce myself, say hello to them. They are going to make or break my talk.
Mm.
So
Yep.
they're really
Oh yeah. Be
important.
nice to the AV guys. They yeah. Yeah.
So that's the second P. So we've practiced, we've prepared, and the D, of course, is deliver. And that is about once you're on top of your material, uh, then it's really having fun with it. There are certain things that you can do that will mess it up, and certain things you can do that will make it go extremely well. I have a little acronym that I teach people about what to do as you walk to the spot that you're going to speak from, and that's BESS. The B is breathe. If your voice goes a little bit like this when you're nervous, you do, a big deep breath will really help to calm you down. And your voice is just breath. So the B is breathe. The E is expand your awareness. Try and take in the whole room. I've seen speakers kind of speak to one person through the whole talk, and that one person in the audience starts to feel pretty uncomfortable after about 3 minutes. So try to see the whole room and talk to everybody and gently move your gaze around. The first S is stance. And I always use a visualization, which I teach to a lot of people, which is imagining you're attached to a string, which is hooked to the top of your head, and everything's dangling from the string. And that automatically puts you vertical, relaxed, your shoulders go back and down. You can move, but it means that you're not kind of hunched or in a strange position or doing anything distracting. And that's the only cardinal sin with these things, is distracting. And the second S, smile. Because if somebody on stage and gives the audience a nice smile, they will think, oh, well, this person knows what they're doing. They should be confident. You get people smiling back at you, and you've immediately made a connection, which is a positive one, with the audience. So, and then have fun.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I can sometimes get so intense that and when I'm listening, I look like I'm about to kill someone. And I didn't know that. I was like, I had a very kind gentleman tell me this morning. He says, don't forget to smile and have fun. Like when you're doing these podcasts, because sometimes I'm locked in like this. When I started speaking and going out on stage, I'd be in such a amped up to get the deal done and provide value. I would forget to relax and smile.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing you saying is the preparation will allow you not to, and I hear it as what I just heard you say is, it's not to be scripted. It's not to be stiff. It is to be prepared in such a way that you know where you're going, you know what you're going to say. Your content is, and I've heard you say this, I know what the big idea is that I'm going to share. It's not 22 different ideas. And then you can have fun. But as I said, a lot of people here, as well as I can see it as any opportunity you have to present, whether it's one person, whether it's at coffee in front of a customer, at home, there's an opportunity to practice.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing to be is conscious all the time. Conscious. I mean, it's one reason why I love speaking on stage, is because, if you're not conscious when there's 1,000 people staring at you, when are you going to be, really? And I mean, conscious of everything, conscious of gestures, conscious of movement, conscious of your, what I call the vocal toolbox, all of the wonderful tools that are in there that most people don't even know about and have never explored. So, your pitch, prosody, pace, all of these kind of things, making sure that you're delivering your gift, because that is what you're giving. And that's a really good idea. If you're nervous about public speaking, have a visualization that you're coming on stage with a great big present all wrapped up, and you're about to give it to the audience. And normally when we're coming to somebody to give them a present, we're looking pretty happy, aren't we?
Yeah, for sure. No, that's brilliant. That is brilliant. That's a great concept to have, because I think it takes you out of self. It takes you out of being self-conscious. And that's one of the things, I know you have this acronym HAIL, and, to be honest, authentic, to have integrity, and the love is to give it to share a gift with other people. Yeah. One of the things is the integrity. Is it integrity that is being yourself?
No, that's authenticity.
Sorry, authenticity. There you go. Yeah. Apparently I need to work on it. So why is it that we struggle with that when it comes to, I know people who are great, they're great storytellers when they're at the pub and they're having a chat or they're with their friends, and then they can't transition to stage. Mm-hmm. And yet you're like, but you did it so easily here. You told a great joke, a great story, a great piece of content, but now you walk out on stage. What's the disconnect there? How do we?
Well, how much time do they spend in the pub, and how much time do they spend on the stage? Would be the big question, I think. So it's practice. It's true. Practice. And if you want to be as good as somebody like Ken Robinson, bless him, I had the pleasure of meeting Ken a couple of times at TED, and what a wonderful man he was. And still the #1 TED Talk of all time. And that story he tells in that talk about the little girl drawing a picture of God. That is his whole talk in 20 seconds, and it's the most charming and funny story you can imagine. If you want to be that natural, practice. I mean, that's his style. You know, if you meet him, he's a raconteur. He always tells stories, and you know, he's funny and witty and so forth. Well, we're not all like that. But then if you look at somebody like, I don't know, Susan Cain, for example. You know, I met Susan just before she gave that TED talk about the power of introverts. She is an introvert. I'm an introvert too. But she learned, she went and practiced, she had training and so forth, because the idea of standing on a stage in front of 1,500 TEDsters was terrifying to her. So she trained and did the PPD, and she did a really great delivery. And that changed her life enormously, and the lives of millions of introverts too, who feel much more value in you know, the way they are. So authenticity, you can be yourself, and it's great to be yourself. It's so much easier to be yourself than it is to pretend to be somebody else that you're not really. That's stressful.
Well, I want to come back to the introvert piece because I think that is very interesting. And I know you are an introvert, and you must be because where you live. And yet when you're on stage, you're able to transition into deliver, perform. But before I get there, you know, I want to get back to this because I think there's such a game of comparison. I think people take on identities. Like when I work with leaders, one of the things I try to find out is who are you as a leader? Like, what are your leadership gifts, your talents? And a lot of times when I've worked with leaders or coach CEOs, I've realized you've kind of taken on the persona of the previous leader, or you've taken on the identity of somebody else, and it doesn't seem to be you. So as you know, I remember one time we had a gentleman who, my brother Brian is a great public speaker, and he can make an audience laugh and think and write. And we had a guy who learned Brian's talk. He knew exactly how many laughs, when he got the laughs. He studied it, and then he went out and did it, and it fell flat in its face. This thing of identity, are you saying that pay attention to who you are when you're in the pub, pay attention to what you say, what content, you know, is it a good idea to ask other people and to invite them into to say, you know, because I think it's a very big thing, especially in today's world. It's like identity is a very confusing thing sometimes. And to
Yeah,
be
it is.
authentic, like that in itself seems like it requires a lot of sobriety, intentional thinking. It needs an outside perspective. And obviously that's why you're coaching people. But when you're coaching people, are you telling them things like that? Like, hey, do more of that. That's who you are. Or
Yes, I mean, I would in if I'm coaching somebody one to one. Sometimes you have to temper who you are. So, for example, I'm working with a couple of guys from Northern Ireland at the moment who are, you know, have a brilliant company called the Executive Athlete Club. So they're helping CEOs to remember that physical health and well-being are quite important, and you can't sit at a desk 18 hours a day and, you know, drive your body into an early grave. So they're working with them to get them as fit as they are, you know, brilliant. They're very Northern Irish. Now, you have a wonderful Irish brogue, which is easy for anybody to understand and very charming. As you all know, the Northern Irish accent has got a particular, it's a stronger accent, and it's got a lilt to it, which involves what's called a high rising terminal. So every sentence goes up at the end as
that's
if it were
right.
a question,
Uh,
you know, and that is a particular style which is quite limiting, actually, because like any form of repetition, it means that you don't have such great range if you're doing something the same way every time. And typically, when speaking, if you're making a statement, you go down at the end. You don't go up at the end, because that's a question. And there's a feeling that that kind of intonation is less strong because it's kind of asking for permission, or kind of asking, is that, there's a sort of elided, is that okay, at the end of every sentence. So, you know, yes, I'm working with them on their consciousness of that. I don't want to, we can't change who they are. We don't want to change who they are. They're from Northern Ireland. That's who they are. At the same time, they're going to be speaking to people who are not. And, you know, it's important to be culturally sensitive. I mean, I'll give you an example of that. I remember doing a talk in Helsinki at the wonderful, amazing concert hall that Mr. Toyota designed there. Wonderful acoustics. And, I gave it my all. And at the end, I got sort of like this. And I thought, I've bombed. They didn't like it. So I went down and had a coffee, feeling a bit, concerned. And people were coming up to me in the coffee room saying, "Thank you. That was the best talk we have had for some." That's the Finns. They're
Culturally,
very
yeah.
well. They don't make
We're laughing in our heads. Yes.
exactly. In America you get the whooping and hollering, but in Finland you get the little ripple. That's
Mm.
the difference. So you have to be conscious of
Yeah.
the cultural meal you're speaking into, or moving in, and being authentic. Sometimes you have to temper that a little bit, or at least you have to understand that you're not going to get necessarily what you want the whole time in the way that you want it. So this is all part of being sensitive and asking again. I come back to, what's the listening I'm speaking into? How can I get the ball over the net in the most effective way?
Yeah. Well, I can also hear when you talk about, when people use the wrong inclination or wrong tone, that one is a statement and one is a question. You immediately confuse your audience.
Yeah.
They're like, is he asking me? Is he telling me? Is he asking me to think about it? Um, and also I think as you said, I think a lot of times, and what I'm hearing you're saying in that is, don't look to the audience for emission feedback. Like, stay the course with, I have a message I'm going to deliver as a gift, regardless of the outcome, because it can throw you. Or you could get, I'm sure there's times, and I've heard my brother talk about this, where you're communicating and you get a laugh. And there's nothing worse than seeing a speaker get a laugh and then pursue 10 more and completely lose their talk. It's like, no, you know. Um, which could happen, as I said, in an office meeting. It can happen for these folks in front of their customers. I want to come back to the introvert piece, because I think it seems to me like there's a bit of a misnomer when it comes to leadership and communication, that people think you must have this huge personality. You've got to be bigger than life. You have to have charisma. You have to have the ability to motivate. And the fact is that a lot of introverts don't believe that they have those gifts because they're quiet. They like the one person in the room when they go to a party and get to know them well. You're an introvert. And when you go on stage, you own it in a very, you seem like you own it in a very authentic way. What tips do you have for introverts? Because everybody gets nervous, but for introverts, how do we encourage introverts to take these steps that you're talking about?
Sure. Well, let's just talk about getting nervous for a second, actually, Dermot, because people have got this negative connotation with getting nervous. Oh no, I get so nervous before I go on stage. It's good.
Mhm.
It fills you with adrenaline and the hormones that you need in order to perform at your maximum ability. So if you change your take on nerves and say, right, I welcome nerves, I'm feeling fully alive and really excited, that perhaps is less of a negative take. It's not bad to be nervous. I still get nervous before a big gig, and it's good. There's nothing wrong with it. So going back to introverts, I am myself on stage. I mean, I stand still and I talk relatively calmly. I am not, a whooping, hollering audience driving into a crazy frenzy type speaker. That would be somebody else, and that's them being themselves. I'm sure. I don't move. If you've ever seen Tony Robbins speak, he's like a tiger. He paces all up and down. He's got enormous kind of physical energy. Well, that's a different person from me. So I think you can own a stage in your own way, as Susan Cain did in that talk on introverts. It was very charming. And you don't have to be shouty and domineering and all that stuff. And as I'm sure, everybody who's listening to this knows, if you work for a shouty, domineering boss, that can be quite tiring, really, and it can be quite difficult to feed back into that kind of noise. I've worked in organizations where there are some, it's run by a very ferocious boss who doesn't like bad news, well, that can be a terrible organization.
Mhm.
So listening in an organization is really, really important as well. Listening for ideas, listening for challenge, and listening, to how understand the team and understand what makes everybody tick so that you can lead them in an effective way. Shouting at people
Yeah.
isn't the best way to lead. And so
Yeah.
there are some of the world's greatest leaders have been introverts.
Mm.
Obviously, you think of somebody like Gandhi.
Mhm.
So you don't have to be,
Yeah.
shouting and out there.
That's so good and so encouraging. And if for anybody who's watching this, I'd highly encourage you to watch Julian's talks because you are very much yourself, very funny, very easy to listen to, and you provide a lot of value. Um, I'm going way long here, but I have to ask you about this because we also have, like myself, I'm a sales guy who became a leader. We have a lot of folks on here who are really great salespeople, and they've generated so much business. They've hired people, and they've now have a team. And preparation for communication is one thing. I know that you are, I think you quote, I've heard you say you're a passionate persuader of people to listen. What are some tips for someone like me who's a talker? A lot of folks on here are talker. How can we become better listeners?
Well, I think one simple way to do this is to establish a better relationship with silence. Half the world's population live in big cities now, and it's quite rare that we encounter silence or even peace and quiet, or even tranquility and nature sound. It's a very good idea to give yourself some silence a couple of times a day if you can. If that means going into a closet, whatever it takes, just to let your ears settle down and recalibrate, and to let everything settle, and then you can listen afresh when you come back.
Mm.
So that's a very good practice, and that will
Mm.
help you to listen as if for the first time to people. I mean, that's a lovely practice as well, to say, these are team people. Maybe you've had them in your team for years, and there's this tendency also at home to say, oh, there you go again. I knew you were going to say that. And
Hmm.
to get a tired listening for somebody, which is a little bit reductive. And I think it's wonderful to set the intention of listening to somebody as if for the first time. I talk about seeing people as opportunities to learn, because listening
Mm.
takes humility as well. And that's one reason why I think listening becomes more difficult as you get more senior in a company, because you're expected to be the person who tells and knows, and not the person who asks and listens. But let me tell you, great listeners, great leaders do ask and do listen, and they gain enormously by doing that. And then, they will give an instruction, and the instruction will be absolutely right because it's given in the right way to somebody who they've understood correctly.
Mm.
Um, there's a thing I will be talking about for the rest of this year, big time in all my performances, uh, which is the biggest missing thing in the world at the moment. I think, as we see society polarizing, people shouting at each other more and more. We see war, we see conflict, and that is validation. All of that conflict comes out of one human tendency, and that is the desire to be right. And that means making somebody else wrong. And so if I'm saying, Dermot, you're an idiot, that's rubbish, we're not going to get anywhere with that, are we? Whereas if I say, Dermot, I don't agree with you, but I can understand, absolutely, I understand why it is that you would believe that, then we're not wrong, we're different. And two people can have different opinions, different views, and both be right. It's not a zero-sum game. And that is fundamental. That understanding has been lost somewhere. Social media, the internet, I don't know, all these things are
Yeah.
making it worse. But, it's now the case that if I'm right, you're wrong, that's it. And a lot of that's just based on opinion, of course, not
Mm.
facts anyway.
Yeah.
So validation, that thing of, I don't agree with you, but I understand why you think that. That is how we can live next door to somebody with whom we fundamentally disagree. That's how democracy can work. And it's how we can have a company with a team of diverse people in it, diverse, challenging opinions, perhaps, perspectives. and respect them all because they're not wrong. They're just
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I tell you how I just heard all of that is, I have I have my goal is when I come in here every day, and we've got 250 people working at the company, leaders, people working remotely, and we're busy. Like everybody on here, everybody's busy. I try and come in, I say I try and come in every day where I'm not underwater here, so that when somebody comes in and they have a problem, I go here straight away. It's not fair on them. I try and start the day here. Okay. And that's on an emotional level. That's like get my stuff out of the way on paper, pray it out, think it out, talk it out, literally work it out so I can come to here prepared here. Here's the piece that you've just given me. Uh, Turning off, getting into silence is also very important so I can turn out all the noise. So I can be here and have space in here to leave some space for somebody to share with me what they're thinking, what their best ideas, what they're frustrated with. I think a lot of times it's very easy to get into when you're in a space, people become a bother, and then you're just trying to get it over with so fast, or all you're thinking about is what you're going to say next and the rebuttal. And I love what you said about that as regards where the culture is. Obviously, we don't get a chance. People are scrolling. We're getting these dopamine hits. God only knows what we're going to see. And then we go to interact with somebody else, and you're like, you're already maxed out. So I just heard you saying, like, turn the sound off, get quiet, take some breaths. Whether it's you're going to communicate or listen, it seems like there's a lot of the same principles, whether you're communicating or listening. And I think what I'm hearing you say is also that listening is probably the most important communication attribute.
Without
Gift.
doubt. Without doubt. And it's the thing, that we so don't teach. So most people don't even know that listening is a skill. They get it confused with hearing, which is a capability. Listening is a skill.
Well,
we can practice it, we can master it.
I hear you also saying that a skill is something that can be developed like a muscle. It can be grown. And no matter who's listening here, whether they're introvert, whether they're the most nervous, I love your process. I love what you've shared because I think it encourages everybody to go, hey, I can do this. And baby steps will count.
Definitely.
Right.
And everybody can do it.
Well, a couple of things. One is you've been very generous with your time. We're going to head backstage in a minute, if you're good with that, to answer some questions with a lot of our coaching clients. I know they're going to have a ton of questions for you. For everybody else, I want to thank you for tuning in. I also want to encourage you to pick up a copy of Julian's book, How to Be Heard. Great read. It's full of great practical tips. I'd highly recommend you go on TED, on YouTube, watch his talks, and go to juliantreasure.com because I know Julian has courses there that you can take and you can practice this and you can learn from him directly. So I'd highly encourage you to check that out. And Julian, thanks again for being on.
Thank you for having me, Dan. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope somebody's got something out of this.
Oh, well, I certainly did. Anyway, I can tell you that. So we'll go backstage here in a second. And for everyone else, I want to thank you for tuning in today. I highly encourage you to pick up Julian's book, How to Be Heard. And I hope you can join us on our next episode with Dave Lineker, who's the chairman and co-founder of Remax International. And he's going to share the leadership principles that helped him and Remax become a powerhouse company and a worldwide brand. So until next time, stay curious, my friends.
Thank you for joining us on this month's Curious CEO. If you're ready to take your leadership to the next level, maybe it's time for you to work with a Buffini certified leadership coach. Our coaches will help you identify and leverage your natural leadership style, develop a strong organizational culture, improve recruiting and retention, and increase the profitability of your business. And among the benefits of our leadership coaching membership is a backstage pass to the Curious CEO that allows you to ask your questions directly to Dermot and his amazing guests. If you'd like to see if Buffini Leadership Coaching is right for you, schedule your complimentary leadership consultation using the URL on your screen.